going to arrive at 3 p.m. Meanwhile, we'll start our questions and answers. Please be brief, concise with your questions, and tell us who the question is directed to. You have to take into account the factor time. So we open the session to anybody who has a question, and please ask it into the microphone so we can hear it. I would like to ask a question of Professor Xie, and after that give some reasoning for it. I don't like to just ask the question. I want to give the reasoning on something that you dealt with there. Indeed, the Cuban government does not have any desire to change. The people of Cuba, the population there, is waiting for the changes to come from above, as have occurred in other latitudes. And why don't the changes come? Because the Cuban government simply doesn't want to make any change because it runs counter to their interests. But we're talking in the present tense. If the Cuban government were to start to make changes with these mini changes which they're mentioning, it's because there is a pressure from below. Otherwise, they wouldn't make any changes at all. And if that pressure from below continues to increase, the changes will have to come from above, or otherwise they will come from below. Otherwise, they will come from below these changes. In other words, there may be an overflowing of citizens because of an awareness on many different things. The citizens of Cuba have learned from lessons internally of the opposition, and they've also what we've received when we were there from abroad. That is an opinion that I want to express. But now I'm going to ask you the question. Professor, what do you consider the best for Cuba in the future, the close future, a socialist or a parliamentarian type of government? Well, based on the conditions that we have, I simply would suggest a parliamentarian system because I think that it has an advantage over the presidential system. Can somebody move the microphone closer? I can't hear what he's saying. The system, good administrator. But more than anything else, I would say a semi-presidential system or a semi-parliamentarian system. I would say that in the case of Cuba, we should have a Cuban-style system. We don't have to copy anybody. We could create it and allow that novel for the Cuban government would be fantastic. I watch a novel every afternoon, discussing the budget. That would be fantastic. Commenting on your initial position, the big question, I am of the opinion that if the economic system and the socio-political system in Cuba is not something, I missed the word, I can't hear him, the sound is not that clear, is not reformed little by little, a system economically we have to change completely. You can't make small changes. An economy is a whole, and we're not going to solve anything if the farmer may be successful with one crop and not later. And in other words, I don't see any possibility of success this way. the minimal changes made by Raul Castro. Now, very well. If we have some type of success, this is a big question. Will the people be satisfied with that? I believe he said. Or would they have other expectations? That is unknown. Lady there. We're getting some bullet shots through the earphones. No microphone for this lady. I believe there's a lady speaking somewhere, but we don't hear her. Without a microphone, we can't hear the speaker at all. All we're getting is a popping noise. This woman is working, now we hear her, preparing the food, making clothing. There is a gastronomical industry going on, a teaching function going on, the supervision of children, and she's taking care of older people, ill people. In other words, the Cuban woman, and I'm talking from my own experience of the last 8 years, I've been working in this area with women for 30 years, the dissident women, but the last 7 or 8 years have been with the normal women, common women. And the Cuban women have not lost the notion of the value of work. The women who start working on their own in Cuba, they're self-employed. They know very well that that work is going to solve the problems of their life, not only for themselves, but for their family as well. In other words, we have to start, I believe, we have to start by focusing on talking about the Cubans with different values, other experiences from other points of view. Perhaps men who work out in the street, I don't mean that men don't work at home in Cuba, they do, but men view things differently as they're solving their problems outside of the home and they're being mistreated at home. Maybe at home they're mistreating them too, but outside, and so they lose the relationship between work and the value of work and solving the problems of life. Women are not waiting for it to come from above because they're not solving any of the food, nor breakfast food or a cracker. You're not solving anything from above. It's all solved from below, from the home. And perhaps we have to start to focus then on each organization and in each group on this approach. What is still redeemable? There's not much redeemable in the Cuban people, and perhaps the contribution of women to the profile of the people. This can serve as an instrument, as a path and a guide way to design this behavior role, modification, which perhaps is not much a behavioral modification, but incorporation of behaviors that already do exist in part of the population, and perhaps we should bring in some other elements because we're talking in two different languages and two different realities, even though we have statistics that are all the same and the history is the same because it's one nation, but there are differences and there are instruments outside in our communities in Cuba which would help us in general to redeem this. I fully agree with you, says someone without a microphone. The reference to work, which has no long been the main means of earning your livelihood, in a factory, say, or in an office, etc. Even it's curious because one of the comments that we heard when we interviewed people with respect to these layoffs, what many people say is they're not afraid of losing a miserable salary that they earn, but it's losing the opportunity of having access to certain raw materials that they can get where they work. It's not I'm losing my salary, but I'm losing an opportunity to do something. The evidence of the role of women does exist, and there is academic, as I recall that I read at some point, some study on the loans, the micro loans in the Asian countries. The people who use them and pay for them are the women. The women use the money and they create their own company and they pay off the loans. I have one question left over very fast. If we haven't completely lost this value for work, the professionals are willing, the doctors, teachers, etc., who no longer work on a certain level, they're willing to be taxi drivers, hairdressers, workers. In other words, the value for work has not been lost. That's my point. Questions, not speeches, please. Good afternoon, Professor Hassel. I come from El Salvador, a country which overnight was dollarized. You talked about dollarization, and therefore we had a depreciation of salaries of 75% overnight. So if you dollarize the economy, but the salaries weren't dollarized, so I comment on this for your interest. And another question, so many Cubans who live in the United States, have you never thought of a possible free associated democratic state? These are two very different subjects. I talked about dollarization. He says without the microphone being fully connected. I'm not interested whether it's a dollar or the South African rand, seeking a way of tying the hands of the politicians, because no matter what the currency you choose, you have to do that. As to the free associated state is a long, complicated subject. I don't think this is the time to go into that. But there is an affinity between Cuba and the United States. I don't think it's ever been lost. And that will be part of the trade in the future, especially the Cuban American community. They will play an important role economically and socially in Cuba. Is there anyone who has a question for Dr. Orlando? He's going to have to leave. Did anybody want to ask him a question? Go ahead. With a microphone, please. We're focused. focusing. My name is Olga Gomez, Alpha 66. We are approaching on the fact that we're resisting. We want to be a symbol of resistance, but as you said once, since 1969 to date, we've all been resisting in one way or another. Can you think of any means for the international community, the Cuban and non-Cuban community that wants to help, could have a means of television or speaking or radio broadcasting, whatever you want to call it, which we could send our message to the Cubans that you can protest individually, they all have to join forces. That should be the byword. We respect you very much. I think that the main thing is that people that the votes of the Cubans, we can't hear what he's saying. In the street, they're carrying out demonstrations, no contact with themselves. I think that's more important than it. Any other question, he says, without a microphone? My name is Raul Moreno. My question is, do you then think, according to your position, that a Cuban leader, a charismatic leader, who would organize all of these organizations could get the Cuban people together and pressure from below and introduce a change? There's no microphone connected at all. We can't hear him at all. There always have been charismatic leaders, he says, but without a microphone. We're trying to hear him over the top of the booth. We really can't hear speakers who don't have a microphone. Sorry, but without a microphone we can't hear the speaker. The rest of the 75 have to rest more than 75. 75 are natural leaders. Saying something about that. A nucleus of resistance based on their leadership. Maybe now the microphone will work. We need many leaders and many strong men to take leadership and have vision. Based this on many, and another interesting thing is the great revolutionary leaders were not the typical Kisbausa, a great solidarity leader, and not as a president. He's still respected. We need more leaders, a lot of leaders, to have democracy. Very good. Okay, you can now leave. You can address questions to any of the other speakers now. Mike, what is your vision of a transition in Cuba? Where will the private entities be in Cuba after the transition? I think he's asking. Well, first of all, I'm not in favor of a transition in the sense of reforms and readjustments of the model, etc. to change the regime. What I want for my country is there to be a spark produced which will create a popular explosion, an explosion. If there's not a popular explosion, if after 53 years of dictatorship, we won't have a democratic regime. That's what we want. I think that's what we all want. We've been struggling for 53 years for that. I am a bit discouraged when I see that the civil society, the microphone is not on. The scenario which is real, I can ask you a question. And unfortunately, this is a scenario where Machado said something about this, and at a time, the sound is not clear. A democracy, a kleptocracy, for 40 thieves, they stole it all. And this is one of the big fears that we have. He's off mic. This man is off mic. We can't hear his voice clearly. I can hear him better over the top of the booth than I can hear him with the earphones. As a condominium at home. Any other question? This is the time for Professor Cordova or...
Undoubtedly, we are dreaming of that. But transitions, as they have said, tell us that it's very highly improbable to have a change. Most probably, it is something that we do not desire. We can continue to dream, but reality is showing us, with all due respect, that we have tried many things. We must try to avoid having one of the grave problems that we've had is that something else. Our great historic weakness has been that we have not defended institutions. I'm very worried about what you said about the charismatic dictator. I prefer institutions, but that is going to take a long time to develop an independent judicial or legal system. It's a matter of generations. Melvius of the National Foundation for National Endowment for Democracy. Number one, going back to the dollarization of the economy. I understand the point of the control of the government and the power to generate currency. An argument in response to that is that it ties the economy of a country, because then the monetary policy is subject to the monetary policy of another, like the European community and the United States, because that is, if the currency is devaluated, then in the other state, then the other one would deteriorate. So what possibilities are there within the legal framework of the country to establish certain institutional controls over the executive power so that it cannot utilize its political power or for it to be using monetary policy for political purposes, and also to avoid a certain dependency on the foreign monetary policy. I'd also like to listen to the opinion of any one of you on the impact of political economic policies that are being applied over the black and mestizo populations of Cuba, which is the majority population and the population that has been discriminated against in Cuba, that has been marginalized, and that has the heaviest, that represents the heaviest social load on the economy. Well, to try to control the budgets through political measures has never functioned. At this time, we have an extraordinarily serious and difficult problem, and there is no political will to resolve it at this time. This would be one methodology, but again, I suggest this as a topic for discussion in order to stimulate conversation and negotiation. If there is a solution, great. Now, if that would work, that would be divine. My idea is simply that when I was writing this book, and unfortunately I only write in English, my imaginary audience would be a forum in Cuba that could see this. That was supposedly my audience, but it is not. And then there is an important problem, as all of us know, that the monies that come from the United States greatly go to white Cubans, because they are the exiles who are away from Cuba. So the black citizens are not receiving proportionately the same as a white population. That's going to worsen the problem that may exist in the because as the economy deteriorates, if the only ones who are surviving are not receiving any further monies from abroad, the racial issue is one of the longest tradition. From 1912, there has been discrimination forever. I had certain reservations on the attitude of the black people. We could call ourselves blacks or whites. There's no need to use euphemisms. But if the black community is a majority, because today, before the whites represented 73%, and today they're 37%. The grave responsibility of the colored people or the Afro-Cuban community is now represented, and I refer to this with pride. I'm very proud that it is a black bricklayer who initiated the movement this time. And I hope that there are many blacks, such as Carolina Bisset, such as Guillermo Cariña, who are blacks who are assuming leadership in Cuba. And they I honor, and I salute for their actions. There's a person who's been asking for the floor, René Diaz, the president of the electrical or energy plants. Welcome once again, René Diaz. It is indeed a pleasure, an immense pleasure to be here, and I am very happy and makes me want to militate once again in defense of all the rights of those men and women who were killed against the wall, and who were killed by those members of the committee who filled with blood those walls of Cuba. And wherever we are, we have to continue to defend them and to shout their names so that this will never happen again. Mr. Fabregat, Luis Felipe Almeida, and Frank Ais, Otto Parellada, I would like you to say that we are here. René Ramos, here. Olivia Alba, here. And René López, here. Omar Guerra Gutiérrez, here. Emilio Japón, here. Francisco Fernández Cabrera, here. And Fernández Tamizal, here. Ángel C. Arancibia, here. Raúl Arboración, here. Domingo Domínguez Allende, here. Ángel Luis Campos Corona, here. Tomás Arancibia, here. Fernando Rodríguez, here. Ricardo Olmedo, here. And these last three were killed at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they called their families to witness their act. This only Langles Perez, here. And Julio Casillas Amido, here. These brothers are alive. They live in our hearts and in our feelings. Wherever we are, wherever we will be, we must give witness to these assassinations. They continue to live in our hearts. As Jose Marti used to say, when they die in the arms of a country that is grateful, the person doesn't exist, and the dead revive and continue to live within us and in our lives. Thank you. I suggest that we stand up for a minute of silence and honor the martyrs of Cuba who were immolated and